Oriel, Governorate Prison, 1914. Iron bars sweat in the winter air. The clank of shackles drowns out prayer. In one of the largest penal colonies of late Tsarist Russia, a young revolutionary measures time not by days, but by willpower. 11 years in prisons, hard labor, and exile will carve him into legend. Yet in these first letters home, the signature is still only a name. Felix Edmundovich Dzerzhinsky. He does not beg, he instructs. He does not complain, he hardens. The myth of Iron Felix is still to come, but the temperament, unyielding, ascetic, almost monastic, is already there, visible in sentences that reject pity and make purpose a substitute for freedom. To understand the steel, you start at the forge. Felix is born on September 11th, 1877, in Dzerzhinovo, near Minsk, into a Polish noble family with little money but an excess of pride and catechism. At home, they speak Polish. On Sundays, they walk to Mass. At night, they whisper about an independent homeland, a word that cannot be spoken loudly in an empire that has learned to fear it. The partitions have turned Poland into a memory on a map, and after the failed January uprising of 1863, the Russian authorities grind down what remains. Polish is stripped from schools and offices. Russification becomes policy, not rumor. Children are taught empire before they learn their own names. At 10, Felix enters the first Vilnius Gymnasium, a prestigious crucible, with rules as rigid as its Latin. He struggles with Russian, answers back to teachers, spends more hours in a punishment cell than in class, and yet excels in scripture until faith evaporates in a single, decisive year. Whether it was a tragedy in the family or a stack of illicit pages by Karl Marx that did the work, his belief shifts from heaven to history. The adolescent zeal stays, the object changes. He trades a priest's cassock he once considered for a conspirator's coat he will wear for life. The underground is not metaphor, but machinery. In Kaunas, he helps run a hectograph, feeding gelatin with inked stencils to turn whispers into leaflets, and the Kaunas worker into a tool that can be slipped through factory gates like a detonator. The Okhrana, the Tsar's political police, answer with surveillance, informants, and birch rod interrogations. Felix is arrested in 1897 after a handoff goes bad, betrayed by a friend already on the payroll. He keeps his mouth closed through hunger and beatings, writes to his sister that prison is preferable to a pointless life outside, and is shipped to exile in the Vyatka backcountry, where even banishment becomes apprenticeship. Each arrest, each escape, each new address in a police ledger is a lesson he will later turn against his enemies when he builds a state security apparatus of his own. The outlines are faint now, but the shape is unmistakable. Exile is supposed to be a slow death of purpose. In Nolinsk, Vyatka Governorate, the regime is routine and numbing. Mandatory check-ins, suspicious eyes, winters that turn breath into glass. Yet for Felix, even banishment becomes a workshop. He meets fellow exiles, including Margarita Nikolaeva, whose Wednesdays are devoted to Marxist study circles. He writes, organizes, plans. When summoned to the local police captain, he cannot suppress the fuse that has already been lit. He calls the official a bastard and a scumbag, earns a harsher sentence, and is pushed farther east to Kaigorodskoye. The authorities intend to isolate him from the urban nerves of the movement. Instead, they give him time to refine the art of disappearing. He learns local rhythms, takes long hunting, trips into the woods, and one day simply does not return. By the time the alarm is raised and telegraphs chatter across districts, he is already miles downriver, then on a train, then in Warsaw, 1899, reborn into illegality. Warsaw is smoke, machines, and whispers. Days are for safe houses and hectographs. Nights are for the factory gates. Short speeches under the rasp of whistles, quick dispersals when boots approach. He writes leaflets and editorials in cramped rooms, trades addresses and passwords, moves as if the city itself were a lattice of trapdoors. Arrest follows, as predictably as sunrise. Prison again. Exile again. Tuberculosis scratches at his lungs. He outruns it long enough to return in 1905 to a Europe vibrating with strikes, barricades, and revolutionary songs. The Russian Empire is reeling from war with Japan. Railways clog with deserters and hunger. The Okrana diversifies from birch sticks to dossiers, moles, and staged provocations. In this ecosystem, Felix's earlier education, betrayals survived, careers managed, typography hidden in kitchens, becomes not a biography, but a toolkit. He meets Lenin at the RSDLP's 4th Congress in Stockholm. Two men of iron temperament measuring each other in clipped exchanges, and meets, almost simultaneously, the woman who will anchor his private life, Sophia Muscat. Her background is conservatory polish. Her new discipline is underground rigor, and together they will translate feeling into logistics, fronts, aliases, escapes. The cycle intensifies. Arrested again in 1908 for illegal activity and prior escapes, sent to Siberia permanently, health failing, will unbroken. He breaks out again. They marry in 1910. Their son Jan is born the following year, not in a home but behind walls and schedules, a life begun inside a system his father is learning to read as fluently as scripture. Absent at first, Felix will not see the child for 8 years, a human cost that registers as a line in a ledger he refuses to balance. By 1912, the walls close in again. Felix, back in Warsaw under false names, is seized and sentenced to years of penal servitude in Oriel Prison, one of the empire's darkest pits. Here, life expectancy is measured not in years, but in weeks. Shackles carve scars into his ankles that will follow him to the grave. Typhus, tuberculosis, suicide, all are constants. In letters, he writes that every week coffins leave the compound, that 5 political prisoners have died in 6 weeks, that conditions are unbearable. Yet even here, he insists he does not break. Prison is only horrible for the weak of heart, he writes, turning survival into creed. It is a line that transforms private suffering into public myth. February 1917. The Russian Empire convulses. Hunger riots, soldiers mutinying, workers striking. The Romanov dynasty collapses. And behind the iron doors, comrades of the revolution storm prisons to free their own. When the gates open, Felix steps out, not as a victim, but as a hardened cadre, one of those who has endured the crucible and can now lead. He trades shackles for a trench coat, his prisoner's uniform for a soldier's blouse. He becomes propaganda chief among regiments, urging soldiers to stop dying for the Tsar, to turn rifles toward their officers. The war has turned Russia into tinder. The revolution needs sparks. Dzerzhinsky, gaunt and coughing but unyielding, is one of the men carrying the match. That August, at the semi-legal 6th Congress, of the Bolshevik Party in Petrograd, Felix is elected to the Central Committee. The vote is both recognition and wager. Recognition of his unbending discipline, wager that his experience with conspiracies and betrayals can be scaled from clandestine circles to statecraft. As the October uprising ignites, he directs critical seizures, bridges, telegraph offices, power stations. These are not just tactical moves, they are arteries of a modern state. Cutting them means cutting the old order's lifeblood. Lenin proclaims a new government. Petrograd is electrified, and Felix Dzerzhinsky stands among the men who turned insurrection into administration. But revolution births chaos as much as order. Ministries lie empty, files vanish, opportunists swarm. Counter-revolutionary cells proliferate in Petrograd, saboteurs disrupt railways, mobs plunder wine cellars. Bread riots continue, transport collapses. The Bolshevik government faces not just political opposition, but social disintegration. Into this vacuum steps a decision to create an extraordinary organ, unbound by precedent, tasked with rooting out enemies within. Its name, the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission. Its first chairman, Felix Dzerzhinsky. On December 10th, 1917, Izvestia prints its address, 2 Gorokovaya Street, Petrograd. 30 men, mostly underground veterans without police training, report for duty. They are not yet executioners. Their mandate is confiscation, eviction, prevention. But the shape of something far larger is already visible. The revolution has acquired its sword, and in Felix Dzerzhinsky, it has found the man willing to wield it. The winter of 1918 tightens its grip on Petrograd, and with it comes a new kind of war. The Great War has gutted the empire. German troops press dangerously close, and inside Russia itself, counter-revolutionary organizations multiply like shadows. On January 1st, an attempt on Lenin's life underscores the fragility of power. The government issues a proclamation. The socialist motherland is in danger. It is a phrase that transforms politics into mobilization, and soon after, capital punishment, abolished months earlier, is reinstated. According to most accounts, it is Dzerzhinsky himself who insists on it. The right to execute is extremely important for the commission, he argues, even if, in his own chilling words, its sword may accidentally fall upon innocent heads. The Extraordinary Commission, or Cheka, as it comes to be known, fires its first bullets in February 1918, executing 2 burglars caught looting state property. It is a beginning that sets precedent, the use of terror as governance. But even as executions begin, politics convulse again. The Bolsheviks prepare to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, pulling Russia out of the war at enormous territorial cost. For Dzerzhinsky, a Pole by birth, the loss of Polish lands cuts deep. For the socialist revolutionaries, it is intolerable betrayal. They conspire to derail the treaty with violence. On July 6, 1918, an 18-year-old SR named Yakov Blumkin, using forged documents bearing Dzerzhinsky's own signature, walks into the German embassy in Moscow and assassinates Ambassador Wilhelm von Mirbach. The conspirators escape, and chaos ignites. Felix rushes to confront the perpetrators, only to be disarmed and briefly arrested by his own subordinates, many of them SR sympathizers. For a moment, the founder of the Cheka is treated not as its sword, but as its suspect. The uprising falters, the SRs are crushed, and Dzerzhinsky is reinstated. Yet the event reveals the thin ice under revolutionary authority, enemies within, forged signatures, loyalties that fracture under pressure. Abroad, foreign intelligence services sent blood. Sidney Riley, the British agent later mythologized as the ace of spies, funnels millions of rubles to conspirators, even bribing a Kremlin Guard commander to prepare an assassination of Lenin and the Central Committee at the Bolshoi Theater. What Riley does not know is that the man he bribed, Eduard Berzin, is already reporting to Dzerzhinsky. The plot collapses, and Riley flees, condemned to death in absentia. Years later, Dzerzhinsky's men will lure him back and finish the sentence. Still, the danger is real. In August 1918, Lenin is shot and wounded by Fanny Kaplan, while in Petrograd, Uritsky, the city's Cheka chief, is assassinated. The Bolshevik leadership declares the Soviet Republic a military camp. From that declaration comes what history will call the Red Terror. The Red Terror is not an abstract phrase. It is the sound of boots at night, the crack of rifles at dawn, and the weight of silence over cities and villages. By the end of 1918, the Cheka has swollen from a mere 30 operatives to over 30,000. Across the provinces, new commissions multiply. 40 governorate branches, hundreds of county cells. What began as a tool for confiscations and evictions becomes an engine for mass arrests, executions without trial, and the establishment of proto-concentration camps. Former nobles, priests, merchants, Cossacks, white officers, even family members of suspected counter-revolutionaries are taken hostage or liquidated. Terror is no longer an emergency measure, it is policy. And yet, inside the storm, Felix Dzerzhinsky remains an enigma. He pushes his men toward ruthlessness, but simultaneously forbids torture, demanding discipline over sadism. There are records of him punishing Chekists who brutalize suspects, sometimes even executing his own agents for abuses. To the outside world, he is the Red Butcher, denounced in European newspapers as the embodiment of Bolshevik terror. To his comrades, he is still Iron Felix, a cold head, a hot heart, and an unwavering conviction that history itself grants him the right to wield the sword. In private letters, he admits that his name has become synonymous with fear, and even suggests that this serves the revolution by forcing obedience. Amid this maelstrom, a rare moment of humanity emerges. After 8 years apart, Felix manages to see his wife Sophia and their son Jan in Switzerland. He travels under disguise, shaven and forged papers in hand, slipping abroad in 1919, while the Civil War rages. Historians still debate whether the trip was sanctioned by Lenin for a secret mission or simply tolerated out of recognition of Dzerzhinsky's sacrifices. Whatever the reason, the reunion is brief but profound. The hardened Chekist finally embraces the boy he has only known through letters. It is a glimpse of the man behind the moniker, a reminder that beneath the iron was still flesh. Back in Moscow, the machinery grinds on. Civil war divides the nation. Reds against whites, cities against countryside, revolution against counter-revolution. Foreign armies land in Arkhangelsk and Vladivostok. Allied intelligence penetrates Moscow's streets. Dzerzhinsky lives in his office at Lubyanka, often sleeping behind a screen while his desk lamp burns through the night. He writes to his wife, "I almost don't leave my office. Here in the corner, behind the screen, is my bed." His body is failing. Tuberculosis, exhaustion, but his determination only intensifies. For Felix, to relent would mean betraying the revolution itself. Civil war consumes Russia like a wildfire, and in its flames, the Cheka expands into something resembling a state within a state. By 1920, it counts not in dozens or thousands, but in tens of thousands of operatives. Their powers are nearly absolute: indefinite detention, summary execution, confiscation of property. The very arbitrariness of their actions spreads fear more effectively than decrees. For Dzerzhinsky, this apparatus is both a shield and a burden. He insists to comrades that his hand never trembles when aimed at the class enemy, yet in private speeches, he confesses unease when repression begins to fall on ordinary peasants and workers. In Tambov, a rebellion of starving peasants is crushed with thousands dead. In Kronstadt, rebellious sailors are executed en masse. Felix, who once believed terror could be precise, now watches it devour the very base the revolution claimed to represent. His protest at the 10th Party Congress is extraordinary. He begs to be relieved of duty, declaring, "I cannot, comrades, I cannot." The party refuses. They argue that no one else possesses the necessary cold calculation and fanatical loyalty. Iron Felix is trapped in his own legend, too valuable to release, too compromised to leave. The Cheka continues, rebranded as the GPU in 1922, its mandate narrowed legally, but its methods unchanged. And yet, even as he presides over terror, Dzerzhinsky throws himself into causes that reveal another face. He becomes obsessed with the crisis of street children, millions orphaned by war and famine. His personal driver recalls him stopping his car to pull children out of asphalt cauldrons, where they slept to keep warm. He takes them to Lubyanka itself, feeds them, and insists they be placed in orphanages. He organizes the Committee for Bettering Children's Lives. Chekists donate part of their salaries to fund schools, communes, and workshops. By 1924, over 90 Albertan youths are in factory schools, and the Kharkov labor commune even produces a camera named after him, the Fed, Felix Edmundovich Dzerzhinsky. Within 7 years, the number of street children in the USSR falls from 5 million to 200,000. To some, this is evidence of his paradoxical humanity. To others, it is simply another form of social engineering under the guise of compassion. Internationally, the struggle continues. In 1920, Poland, under Marshal Józef Piłsudski, launches a massive offensive, supported by Western powers, dreaming of resurrecting a commonwealth that once stretched across Eastern Europe. Dzerzhinsky, though Polish by birth, has long declared himself Bolshevik first. He hopes Poland's future lies inside the Soviet orbit. He helps form a Polish Revolutionary Committee in Białystok, drafts manifestos, organizes supplies. But the Polish people reject Soviet rule, and Piłsudski's forces drive the Red Army back. The peace treaty of 1921 returns vast swaths of Ukraine and Belarus to Poland. For Felix, it is a wound that cuts deeper than politics. A personal defeat, the permanent loss of his homeland to a rival vision. After the failure in Poland, Dzerzhinsky's energies turn inward, to the arteries of the Soviet state itself. In 1921, he is appointed People's Commissar for Railways, a position that seems almost absurd for a man known as the master of prisons and plots. But the choice is deliberate. The railroads, devastated by war and looting, are the skeletal system of the new nation. Without them, famine relief cannot move, factories cannot restart, armies cannot march. Entire sections of track lie in ruins, bridges are down, locomotives sit rusting in depots. To entrust this chaos to anyone but Iron Felix would have been unthinkable. Dzerzhinsky attacks the problem with the same severity he once applied to conspiracies. He recruits former Tsarist railway officials, not to punish them, but to use their expertise. He bribes them with food, coal, even wood for their homes. He institutes bonuses for engineers who save fuel and maintain accident-free records. He treats corruption as counter-revolution. Bribery cases are punished by firing squad. Within months, trains carrying grain and meat from Siberia begin to move again, east to west, around the clock. By spring 1922, the famine is partially relieved, and the railway system, though still fragile, has begun to breathe. That same year, Lenin seeks to soften the Soviet Union's image abroad. Foreign investors are wary of pouring money into a country ruled by an organization known for midnight executions. The Cheka is dissolved, replaced by the State Political Directorate, the GPU, still under Dzerzhinsky's leadership, but framed as a legal investigative body subordinate to the prosecutor. In reality, the sword is merely sheathed. Intelligence, counterintelligence, and covert operations continue, now cloaked in the language of law. The foreign press still calls them Chekists, and the fear lingers. Simultaneously, Dzerzhinsky begins to wield economic influence on a broader scale. After Lenin's death in 1924, he is asked to lead the Supreme Soviet of the national economy, essentially placing him in charge of the USSR's entire industrial apparatus. Here again, pragmatism emerges where one might expect only fanaticism. He supports the new economic policy, the NEP, a hybrid model that permits small-scale private trade and limited market incentives. His argument is practical. Peasants and workers cannot be fed by ideology alone. By stabilizing currency, encouraging output, and allowing modest entrepreneurship, he helps double industrial production within a year. For a moment, the Soviet ruble even holds value abroad at roughly 6 U.S. dollars. But progress is uneven. Heavy industry lags far behind pre-war levels, villages remain desperately poor, and a sales crisis leaves factories without markets. Dzerzhinsky drives himself mercilessly, pushing through night after night of paperwork, inspections, speeches. His health, already shredded by years in shackles and exile, collapses under the weight. In 1925, doctors demand he reduce his hours, forbid him from speaking at long party meetings, and even prescribe time outside Moscow. He refuses. "I could give more," he tells his wife, "but I am exhausted." His cough worsens, his heart strains, yet he cannot step away. The revolution is a jealous master. It will not release him until the end. July 1926. Moscow swelters, but inside party halls the air is heavier than the heat, thick with factional debates and whispered power struggles after Lenin's death. Dzerzhinsky, gaunt and pale, arrives to deliver a speech on the desperate state of the economy. Witnesses later recall how often he pressed his hand to his chest as though the heart inside were both burden and engine. To many in the room, the gesture looked rhetorical. In truth, it was the signal of a body failing under the weight of unrelenting work. He finishes his address, sits down, and collapses, carried out, given drops of lily of the valley, and a camphor injection, he manages only a few words before refusing further help. Hours later, Felix Edmundovich Dzerzhinsky, Iron Felix, dies at just 48 years old. The cause: cardiac paralysis, the culmination of years of prison malnutrition, tuberculosis, and merciless exertion. His death is not simply the end of a man, but the closing of an era. For comrades, he remains the knight of the revolution, a fanatic whose cold head and hot heart carved a path through the chaos of civil war and famine. For enemies, he is the Red Butcher, the architect of terror, whose sword never hesitated to strike. Both images are true and neither complete. In his private life, he rescued children from the streets, founded orphanages and schools, and inspired Anton Makarenko's communes that would shape generations of Soviet youth. He cared deeply for his wife and son, though he rarely saw them, and kept their photographs on his desk beside portraits of Lenin. In his political life, he designed systems that wielded repression as strategy, embedding fear into the very fabric of governance. History judges him with contradictions. Was he the protector of a fragile revolution or its most ruthless executioner? Did his compassion for children redeem his ruthlessness toward adults, or was it simply another form of control? What cannot be denied is the scale of his imprint. From the founding of the Cheka to the railways he resurrected, from the famine relief he organized to the terror he oversaw, Dzerzhinsky embodied the paradox of revolution itself: hope entwined with fear, compassion inseparable from cruelty. In one of his last letters, he wrote, "Life is in flux, and that is its beauty. Something dies in a man all the time and is born again." For Iron Felix, the flux ended in 1926, but the institutions he built, the myths he inspired, and the debates over his legacy would live on. Long after his heart gave out, long after the sword he wielded was taken up by others.